Hi, friends. Mr. Patrick here. I'm here to talk about the orchestra and the instruments of the orchestra. And we're going to learn a song about the orchestra to help us remember all the things. So, we're studying this year the classical and romantic periods. Classical period is between 1730 and 1820. The romantic period, there's a bit of overlap, but around 1800 to 1909. Before all that, we had the Renaissance and Baroque periods, and we want to talk about that a little bit because there's a lot of contrast between the periods. The Renaissance period was marked by spiritual expression, which was in itself reserved, so there wasn't a lot of expression allowed because they considered music to be a very spiritual thing. So there wasn't a lot of extra things going on with instruments. Everything was really reserved and conservative. In contrast to that, the Baroque period, there was a lot more freedom to express. Everything was elaborate. The music was flowery, and lots of dynamic changes were acceptable. And then the pendulum swung back to being conservative during the classical period, where music was more repetitive. There weren't a lot of dynamic changes, and more reserved. And then, so as it swung again, the Romantic period incorporated a lot more instruments into the orchestra, and a lot more expression and dynamic shifts, and much more contrast to the classical period. So, I want to talk a bit about the seating arrangement in those orchestras of those periods. The classical period, I'm going to put a picture right here, where you can see that the string section is in the front, closest to the audience, and that's because the string section is the quietest section of the orchestra. And behind them would be the woodwinds and the brass section, and then behind them is the percussion. The main instrument of the classical period for percussion were the timpani, those big kettle drums that you can see in the back there. In contrast to that, the Romantic period seating arrangement, you can see, has a lot more instruments involved. In addition to the clarinets and the flutes and the oboes and bassoons, we have trumpets, trombones, tubas, and a really cool instrument in the string section called the harp. And we also have a lot more percussion involved, and that's because of the musical expression that was acceptable during that period. So I'm going to talk about the instrument families of the orchestra. The strings family, the woodwind family, the brass family, and the percussion family. A little bit more detail as we learn the song. I'm going to start with the percussion family. So percussion instruments are made of wood, metal, or skin, and you can shake, scrape, or tap on them to make their sound. So, in a little bit, you're going to see me play a few of those instruments, but the first one that I want to show you is the wood instrument, and I have this little frog that has some spikes on his back. So you can tap him to create a sound with a stick, or you can scrape his back to sound like a croaking frog. So wood instruments have an earthy wooden sound to them. The metal instrument I have is this cymbal that you might see on a drum set. It's a circular piece of metal. And this one in particular is called the splash cymbal. So if you play it hard, it kind of makes a splashy sound. But basically you tap on it in certain places to get a metallic shimmery sound. You can also scrape it to get a kind of a shimmery sound. So that's a metal percussion instrument. And the skin percussion instruments are ones that are the iconic drums. So this is a drum that you would see on a drum set, and it has a stretched membrane across the circle frame, and it has a wooden shell. So the skin instruments have a membrane across which is stretched that you tap to vibrate to create the sound of a drum. So I'm going to use the instruments I'm showing you to create the accompaniment for the orchestra song that we're going to learn together. So I'm going to play for us the percussion parts for that song. So the next instrument family that I'm going to talk about is the strings. The strings family are any instruments that you scrape across the string with a bow. The bow is made out of horsehair, and the horsehair is saturated with tree sap, which is called rosin. And the strings are tight across this wooden body, and when you drag the bow across the body, you get a sound that is a constant vibration. And this is a violin. All the string instruments have this type of shape. The violin is the smallest in the orchestra, so it has the highest sounds, highest pitches. And it goes all the way from violin to the viola, to the cello, to the double bass, which I'll show you in just a minute. But the violin has 4 strings, and the smallest string is the highest string because it's the thinnest, and then the thickest string is the lowest sounding. So the strings have different pitches based on the thickness of their string or the amount of string that is allowed to vibrate. So when I push my fingers down on the string, on certain places, it shortens the length of string that is allowed to vibrate. So if I play this string open and then push my finger down, the notes that I push my finger down change the pitch higher. So I'm going to add the upright bass to our accompaniment as we get going to the next family. So the next family we're going to talk about is the woodwinds, and there are instruments that you blow into to create the vibrations and the pitches. This one is called a clarinet, and it has a wooden reed that vibrates against the mouthpiece. So the way that the clarinet makes a sound is the air vibrating across the reed travels through the tubing. And the longer the tube that is allowed to vibrate, the lower the pitch. So I control how long the tubing is by how many fingers I push down. So a very common instrument in the orchestra. Another woodwind instrument is the saxophone. You can see it also has a wooden reed. And it is different from the clarinet because it's made out of brass. So it's going to be much louder and a little deeper. So that's the saxophone. The next instrument in the woodwind family that I have is a flute. And the flute does not have a wooden reed, but it is in the woodwind family because it vibrates air through the tubing and has holes that you cover just like the other two instruments. So the flute is different because you blow air across a little hole in the mouthpiece. It breaks the air up in a way that vibrates it through the entire length of the tube, just like this. So that's the woodwind family. The next family I'd like to talk about is the brass family. The brass instruments are made of brass like the saxophone, but the way they make their sound is instead of vibrating a piece of wood, you vibrate your lips as you blow into them. So this mouthpiece helps me control the pitch as I tighten and loosen my lips. So a lip buzz sounds like this. When you put that in the mouthpiece, it sounds like this. And then when you put the instrument together, all that the air travels through the tubing and out the end called the bell to create the sound of a trumpet. So the trumpet is an instrument that has valves. The valves channel the air through different lengths of tubing that creates the high and low pitches. But you can also create high and low pitches by tightening or loosening your lips, and those are called partials. So if I don't hold down any valves and I play the first note C, it sounds like that. If I tighten my lips to the second partial without pushing down any valves, it sounds like that, and I can go up even further. And back down. So that's the trumpet. The next instrument that's in the brass family that I have is the trombone. The trombone is much lower sound than the trumpet because it has a much bigger mouthpiece and because it has larger and longer tubing. So what you can see that the trombone has that the trumpet does not is a big long slide. And this slide allows the tubing to be lengthened or shortened to control the pitch. So if I play the trombone with the tubes all the way up in the first position, it sounds like this. But if I lengthen the tube by sliding all the way out, you get a much lower sound. So trombone players memorize where their hands should be in relative to their mouth to find the notes of a scale. So that's the trombone. So now that we have those instruments providing our accompaniment, let's learn the orchestra song in order of the instruments mentioned in the song. So the first instrument is the violin, and the song goes, "The violin's ringing like lovely singing. The violin's ringing like lovely song." next instrument mentioned in the song is the clarinet. The clarinet part goes, the clarinet goes doodle 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 det. The clarinet goes doodle 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 det. And the next instrument mentioned in the song is the trumpet. The trumpet goes like this. The trumpet is praying. The trumpet is praying. Sadly, I do not have a horn today, but I'm going to demonstrate the horn part on my trombone. So the horn part in the song is one note throughout, and it goes, the horn awakes me at morn. The horn awakes me at morn. So as we introduce the next instrument in the song, I'm going to show you some things about the way the drums are tuned. So the big kettle drums in the orchestra have a mechanism that you can change the pitch by loosening or tightening the membrane on them. So the smaller of the two drums that I have is what I'm holding here, and it's going to be playing the 5 note. The 5 note is the 5th note of the scale. So if we count from 1, we can climb up our pitches to 5 like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this being the 5, I'm going to show you the 1, which is going to be a much larger drum. So this is the larger drum. You can see I have it standing on the floor, and it has a much lower pitch. So our song, when we use the drums, goes, the drums playing 2 tones, they're always the same tones. 5, 1, 1, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 1. So thank you for watching my orchestra presentation video. I hope to see you guys soon. Bye. The violins ringing like lovely singing. The violins ringing like lovely song. The clarinet ringing like
clarinet, guides the bleed dead. The clarinet, the 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 clarinet, guides the